In this next problem, we have been told that the typical amount of sleep per night for college students has a normal distribution with a mean of 7 hours and a standard deviation of 1.7 hours. So now let's answer some questions about this. The first one is telling us that about 68% of college students typically sleep between what and what hours per night? Well, 68% is corresponding to our normal distribution to say that we are within one standard deviation of the mean. So if we have a mean of 7 hours, that means I need to subtract our standard deviation from that once. So 7 minus 1.7, and that gives us 5.3. So they sleep between 5.3, and then I need to take my mean of 7 and add the standard deviation of 1.7 to it, and that gives us 8.7. So we can say 68% of college students typically sleep between 5.3 and 8.7 hours per night. The next one, we have about 99.7% of college students typically sleep between what and what hours per night. And now this one, the 99.7, is our empirical rule to mean within 3 standard deviations. Which means we need to take our mean of 7 and add our standard deviation of 1.7 to it 3 times. So we get 12.1 for the upper bound of that. And then I also need to take my mean of 7 and subtract the standard deviation of 1.7 from that 3 times. And we get 1.9 hours for that lower one. So we can say between 99.17% of college students typically sleep between 1.9 and 12.1 hours each night. The next problem, we are asked what percent of college students typically sleep less than 5.3 hours per night. So now I'm going to scroll down to my normal distribution picture that I have here. I have all the percentages labeled for it, but I need to put in my values for my mean and going +1 and -1 and so on for our standard deviations. And what's helpful for this is to actually use our values for the amount of hours. So we know our mean is 7, so I'm going to put that directly in the middle where the mean would go for our picture for our normal distribution. And now as I go to the right, I'm going to add our standard deviation to that. So if I go 1 to the right, that means I'm adding the standard deviation once to get 8.7. If I go along again to my next spot to the right, I need to add another standard deviation. So I'm adding 1.7 again to get 10.4. And then the next one, I'm going to add 1.7 to 10.4, and we get 12.1. And then we can move along to the left. So I have my mean of 7, and I need to subtract 1.7 from that. So that gives us 5.3. And then we can subtract 1.7 from our 5.3 to get 3.6. And then we can do that one more time to get 1.9 for the next one. So now we can use this to answer our last 3 questions here. We have what percent of college students sleep less than 5.3 hours per night? So we have 5.3, and now we can take all of our percentages that are on the left of that, because that's going to be our percentage that sleep less than 5.3 hours. So we have 0.15 plus 2.35 plus 13.5. And if we add all those together, we get 16. So we can say 16% of college students sleep less than 5.3 hours each night. The next one, we want to know what percent of college students sleep between 3.6 and 8.7 hours per night. So I can take a look at 3.6 and my 8.7. And now I just want to add up my percentages that are between those two regions. So we have 13.5 plus 34 plus another 34. And that's going to give us 81.5%. So 81.5% of college students get between 3.6 and 8.7 hours each night. And then lastly, we want to know what percent of college students typically sleep between 10.4 and 12.1 hours per night. So we have our 10.4 and the 12.1. Those are right next to each other on here. So it's just one region, which is 2.35. So we have 2.35% of college students sleep between 10.4 and 12.1 hours each night.